with Master Mikel Steenrod to discuss Taoism. Mike, Taoism has sort of permeated culture in general, with Bruce Lee. Everybody's heard about Bruce Lee and overfilling the cup and, little aphorisms like that. But what's it like to be, and what could we expect by being a Taoist?
It largely depends on what you want to do with your Taoism. So there isn't, you're not hardwired into a particular pathway. Essentially, if you're looking for non-ritual and non-philosophical systems, so I could give a big overview, but let's just say within the Four Ascendant Sphere Tradition, which is a 1,500-year-old Taoist tradition, there are essentially two pathways. One pathway is the pathway of liberation or enlightenment. Enlightenment is actually a more modern kind of bandied about term, and it doesn't have a great deal of, to me, it doesn't have a great deal of value. Most other people will recognize it, and it's a trigger term for them. So it's like, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. It triggers certain thoughts and values and other things within them. Liberation is really kind of that pathway, and you're freeing yourself from the constraints of the world. With the other pathway that's available is the art of living, which is kind of the pathway of happiness. How do I live a happy, moderately successful life? It's not about having ecstatic success or ecstatic happiness. It's like, how do I get through my life and have it be fulfilling, have myself be happy with my relations, with my interaction with the world. And that's the art of living. The vast majority of what people want from spirituality lies in the art of living. It actually doesn't lie on the path of liberation. The path of liberation or enlightenment is really for people that have a tremendous discontent with the world to start off with. That's the only thing that can really motivate it. And they want to pursue truth and feel that they are stuck at some intuitive, instinctive level, that they're stuck in a place that is not true, is not real, and is denying them both meaning and truth.
How can someone distinguish between not really just, but unhappiness and a deep dissatisfaction?
Some people know, but the thing is that they may not want it, meaning that they may not truly want the outcome of the path of liberation, let's say. The best way that I tell people is that it doesn't matter what pathway you're on, you need to pursue the same things to start off with. So as a person starts off on, let's say, they're on a great enlightenment journey, that's what they want, they're trying to find out what the true world is, who they truly are. That's very similar to the pathway to happiness as well. And so with happiness, you're essentially learning to balance out the parts of your life and live in a meaningful way. With liberation, you have to do those things no matter what. And so I oftentimes, since I'm a more experienced and senior trainer, what I do is I oftentimes get people from other religions. So the reality is that Taoism is rarely a person's first religion. There's not enough information with regards to it. A lot of the information that's out there is actually false or simply contained in rules of thumb or pithy sayings. And you can't really do much with that when it comes down to like getting down and dirty with your own enlightenment, to put it in that way. And so what happens is I get a lot of people that have developed part of the path. And so they're on it, but they're stuck. And they can't understand, well, why doesn't this work? Or why doesn't that work? Or why doesn't this work? And usually the first thing I do is I find out, well, what are you doing for your day-to-day living? How are you handling the basic management? So how are your relationships? How is your resource management? For most people, that means finances. And that's an easy way of thinking about it initially. You quickly find out that that is not it. How are you for dealing with your self-maintenance? Like, do you get up and take a shower? Do you eat food? Do you, down through the list like that?
Yeah, those are real life, practical steps that you have to solve those first to move forward. So let's say, people may have the idea of reaching enlightenment. They may not even know what that means, but they may not need it. It may be really hard, but they may not need it, and they may not even want it. But there's a very practical way to use Taoism in day-to-day life, and that's the art of living.
Yes.
What are the components of the art of living?
Well, the art of living really boils down to 4 major pieces. And if you really want to make it that way, it can be 3 major pieces. But essentially, it's a management of resources. And by management, I mean getting more of a thing, getting rid of a thing, and moving the things around. So you're managing it. If you're not good with any one of those things, you're going to cause yourself some form of misery.
That's just reality, right?
Yeah. And the next one would be relationships. Same thing. Getting relationships, getting rid of relationships, and changing them around, changing their nature. The next one would be self-development. And so a lot of times when I say self-development, people are like, well, I took a course in this and I took a course in that. Yeah. But if you ask them, well, what was your course in? What they were really trying to do is to build up their resources or in some way handle their relationships better, that's noble. But the reality is that that's not what self-development refers to. Self-development refers to what did you work on inside of yourself, independent of the value to other people. And so,
okay. So what you're saying, if I take a class in business at the community college, it's not really self-development. It's development of a skill that will be valued by other people so that I can increase my resources.
Yes.
I see. Okay. What would qualify as self-development?
Well, let's say you learn to meditate or deepen your meditation. That's for you. It is self-driven. And we start to bump into one of the defining factors of Taoism, and that is Taoism is a self-interested religion. Now, not selfish, self-interested. Self-interested means that you have a focus on your own development. And by improving or developing yourself, that will actually ripple out and affect everything that you do. So that's, if you look at the enlightenment pathway, so essentially religions can be divided into social religions and non-social religions. A social religion seeks both social power and social goals.
Keeping society together and attaining social status in that.
Yeah. And you can look at it, the great bulk of religions, and they fulfill that purpose. They're a social religion. They have a social end. Many times they're used to create law, so they become a source of law. One of the things that I've oftentimes told practitioners is that they need to avoid those temptations. And that is, Taoism was never intended to be a source of human law or law for society. It was intended to be a source of internal modification and internal development. And now what happens is that after a person has developed to a certain point, there tends to be a range of things that everybody who's gone through that process agrees on. Tends to be and agrees. And but there are many things that aren't agreed upon. However, it's a matter of, let's say we all walk outside and we look up at the sky and go, sky's blue. We all can agree on that. Most of the people will agree on that. And, different people will divide it in different ways, but that's essentially what's happening. So as we start looking at self-development, we're not looking at achieving a social end. We're looking at achieving a personal end and making personal modification. And people can ask, well, does that mean that Taoism is against social development? It's like, no, what that really says is that Taoism is not intended to be everything.
Yes.
It's not intended to define the entire world. It's not a tool for that end.
But also, if you have a bunch of happy people, then you're going to have a happy population and potentially a happy society.
Well, I would absolutely agree with that. One of the things that I've been talking about is a saying that's been bandied about and got popular a couple of years ago, and that is, hurt people hurt people. So if you possess internal pain, you cause or have a greater likelihood, I would say, of causing pain to others.
Yes.
And so
I think psychology would agree with that as well.
Yeah. And it's exactly the same thing. It's the reason that somebody on the enlightenment pathway can be held back by lacking managements. They have deep unmet needs and deep unprocessed issues within them. And for that reason, no matter what efforts they make in spiritual practices, they're using it to conceal their own internal pain and their own internal limits. And those all serve to be anchors that holds a person where they're at. So they can be like, oh, I practice this, I do this over here, I worked at Qigong. And it's like, what about you inside? How have you dealt with your history? Yeah. Do you still carry the pain of this and this? Have you even looked at it? What's your relationship to it? Yeah. And those are all internal journeys. Yes. And Taoism is there to provide you with the tools, but many times people use Taoism to run away. And it can be used for that purpose. You can create barriers around yourself. You can gather great spiritual knowledge, but at the end of the day, the reason you're limited is because you're not willing to do the type of deep work that you need to in order to move forward and allow change to occur. Essentially, if you're anchored to your past, you can't move past it. Yeah. So when we're looking at, that's a little bit of art of living, primarily because if a person has major issues with their management, it's because of an internal issue. I see. It's not because they're simply unaware of those things. That lack of awareness is created by internal problems. And they're unaware because they don't want to look at that thing. Yes. Well, that's why they're seeking enlightenment, right? Yeah. I mean, it may be. So we have, excuse me, for art of living, we have resources, we have, what was the next one? Relationships. Relationships. And then we have self-development. Self-development. That's 3. And then you were saying that there's sometimes a 4th. Self-maintenance. Oh, self-maintenance. How's that different than self-development? Well, self-maintenance is the stuff that you do to take care of yourself on a day-to-day basis. And it can be basic stuff like hygiene and such. But if I'm using it as a diagnostic, so if somebody has come to me, and you can certainly run this diagnostic yourself. That's one of the things I talk about repeatedly. You may want the aid of somebody else, but the truth is that the basic components are simple enough where anybody can run them by themselves. Okay. So if somebody's asking me a question, though, and they're sitting back going, well, why am I having the trouble with this or that? One of the things I try to find out, sometimes by just directly asking or not by directly, sometimes people they're concealing a pain which is so great that if you even touch it, they run. The only person that can touch that pain in that circumstance is them. Nobody else can touch it. Yes. And the truth is they've been probably running from touching it themselves for a long time. So there's a certain amount of guidance that has to occur within there. But one of the most basic things is to simply count hours. And so let's say a person has dissatisfying relationships or they can't acquire a relationship when they want one. Right. That's a common complaint, right? Right. One of the first things that I'll ask is that, well, how much time do you spend on relationships or building your relationship skills, pursuing another relationship? And sometimes you get somebody very financially successful, no real relationships at all. Then you start looking at it and it's like, well, I spend like 18 hours a day on these, on my profession, whatever it happens to be. Yes. And it'd be like, well, how much time did you spend on your relationships, trying to acquire a relationship, understand them, build your capability in those areas? And they'll be like, well, this week. And it's pretty consistently like that. And it's a matter of, well, I went out to this and this, and it's like 3 hours. Okay. Compared to 18 hours a day in another arena. Right. So, and they'll be like, well, what do I need to do? I have to sleep. It's like, what you have to do is turn the knob so that you're not spending 18 hours on resource anymore. And instead, yes, but that's the field they understand. That's that they're comfortable with. So is there a way to get us comfortable with the other components of a happy life? No, you have to accept it and then just start. Wow. There's no way around that. The truth is that the person who's polarized themselves in that area has usually done it because of pain. Oh. And so there's something deep and underlying, but now the pain of a relationship lack is growing so much that it's starting to overcome their historical pain.
Yes.
And, you know, when we run into our work, like I can easily become a workaholic. When we run into their work, the things that motivated it or motivate that running into that, sometimes it's the fascination, sometimes you get caught up in this or you get caught up in that, but there's a lack that led to it. You know, you ran into work because you didn't want to do those other things.
Might not be a lack of money. It might be I don't want to say fear, but maybe a fear of the relationship component.
Yeah.
And or even self. How do you describe it to make yourself better? Investment,
self-development.
Self-development.
Yeah, self-investment is a good way of saying that too. So.
That's there are not a lot of examples of pure self-development in our culture. It's, you know, at least personally, I always sort of feel like, well, I can develop myself this way in order to get or to move into another direction. How does a person think of which direction they want to develop themselves in?
First, I think you have to accept that self-development is a necessity. It's one of the fundamental managements. And when we do that, we have to start off with a truth about our pain and dissatisfaction. Mm. We basically have to sit back and say, well, the reason I'm seeking this is because I don't like my life. I don't like this portion or this portion of it. And as you can sit back and say, well, overall, you know, there are plenty of happy rewards here, but I feel a lack. Whatever it happens to be, as I oftentimes tell people, you're under no obligation to be honest to anybody else. Now, that's not the best way to pursue relationships, but the truth of the matter is you're not under any obligation to be truthful for anybody else. Again, relationship impacts for that. Mm-hmm. But you do have an obligation to be truthful to yourself. Mm. And
that's big.
Yeah. If you can't do that, then you can't change. And
that's the first step then, right?
Right. And then once you've done that, a lot of times what people find is that unless they're in a very hostile situation, it's easiest to deal with others with a measure of honesty, because it's less time consuming to be somebody else. Or it's less time consuming than being somebody else other than the person you are.
You mean it's easier to live your life if you don't lie to yourself to be something that you're not?
That is true. It's also easier to live your life if you're not spending a lot of time lying to other people. Mm. Now, the truth is you could be in a lying and illusionary situation, so that doesn't always apply. And people, I know some people will sit back and go, well, you should change that. It's like, you should change a lot of things. It's a lying and illusory world. Can't change the whole world.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Start off with the arena of the self.
Yes.
And then see what opens for you and what you have the strength to do.
Again, it's sort of like a fractal thing, you know. If we had a bunch of happy people, then society and the population and the country would be happier by extension, not by extinction.
I would say that, again, you're hitting the nail on the head with that one. And the reality is that if pain isn't driving everything, and pain's a huge motivator for people.
Sure.
So what happens if a person pulls pain out of their life? You know, what do they do with their life? And how does the world change as a result?
Yeah.
And the fact is that the world does change quite dramatically, and it does change for individuals. A lot of the things that people they value because of their ability to conceal or remove pain from a given circumstance.
Wow, yeah.
And so if that pain isn't there, then they stop valuing it, or they just start dropping things. And that can also be, so for example, for some people, that's what leads them to adopt the relationships that they do. They have an inherent pain. And they're willing to be in this relationship or act in this way over here because of that pain. And when there is no pain, they drop those components.
They can move to different kinds of relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's the same thing. If you have somebody that's spent all their time on resource management or acquisition, they've been driven by pain. So I sit back and say, well, I mean, you only have so many hours in the day. Is that true? And it's like, well, yeah, of course that's true. If you want this over here, does it make sense that you will have to spend time on it? Like, yes, that does make sense.
And the person knows it because they're successful in resources, so you actually know that.
Yeah.
But they're avoiding it.
They're avoiding it. And
does it make sense to divide your day up in 4 equal portions, just to use 3 hours for resource, 3 hours for self-improvement, 3 hours, and so on and so forth, like that? Or
you can. The reality is that you do have to block out time. Like usually there's a non-counting time, which is like the time of your sleep. And so, and there's actually a whole series of talks or debates around that as well. But the reality is that if you're counting hours, which is a good indicator, what you're looking for are glaring imbalances.
Okay.
Because it's not typically subtle. It's glaring. And whereas people sit back and look at it and go, okay, yeah, this is a big deficit. And humans are capable. So, for example, some tasks do cross over. Some tasks in a given year or a season, let's say the fall is your season for self-development. So you change the knob in the fall and tune up the hours that go into self-development.
I see, yeah.
And it could be a different way as you're going through. You may have to introduce small deficits for it and excesses at other times.
Yeah, that's a natural thing to do, right?
And you're
in winter,
yeah.
or before winter, you store food, so you could think of it that way. And in summer, you don't worry about that.
Yeah.
But in fall, you start the harvest. So
yeah, but in most of the situations I look at, it's glaring. You know, it's literally like a matter of like, well, you spend all your time on this, 10 minutes on self-maintenance, your resources are at 30 minutes a day, and you know, you have a great social network, but you're starving and you're dirty.
Right.
And that will create disease for you, which will create a whole other series of pains.
So people can self-assess that initially.
Oh, they should.
They should.
Yeah. And what you're looking for are glaring differences. And so, and if you look at it, and let's say you're successful for resources or you're investing all your time and work, and you sit there and go, well, I have this dissatisfaction. In the beginning, you may not even understand your own pain or dissatisfaction, but by going through the hours, you start to understand it. You start to realize that, well, I feel wrong. Okay. I feel as if I should be experiencing something else.
Yes.
And then you look at your outlays and go, well, the reason is I haven't committed anything to self-development in 10 years, 20 years.
And that can happen too. I think a lot of people have that sort of gnawing feeling, but this gives a roadmap, as it were, to analyze, just making up words now, to figure out what might be the problem. It doesn't really present a solution immediately, but it gives a way to figure out, oh, well, maybe I should look into this category of activities instead of it being so overwhelming.
And you do need to go through kind of a process of assessment to start off with. Yeah. Because you don't know what the lay of the land is. And what you have are a series of perhaps undefined impulses. And so, for example, a lot of times, if we're talking about personal liberation, so we'll jump over to the side.
Okay.
Let's say a person works hard, they have a family, and they hit midlife. And they start to realize, you know, none of this is what I signed up for. This is not the world that I wanted to be part of.
Yeah.
I really just felt I should pursue it.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of like, well, that is the package you signed up for. But as with most people signing up for a package, they don't know what it involves until they get to that point in their life. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, why would you not readjust? Is it because the package is telling you that you shouldn't readjust? And
or readjust catastrophically.
Yeah. And so what happens, though, is that pain
Yeah.
And that discomfort is going to act out in some fashion.
Yeah.
And it's going to come out of that person. And what they see around them, what they can see around them, is just stuff that is suppressing them. And so now they're just going to start swinging the sword. You know, whatever it needs to burn or get chopped apart, they're going to burn and chop it apart.
How do we avoid that?
Well, in those circumstances, that's an individual that likely has not done much in the way of self-development, because self-development leads to self-understanding. And the truth is that if you really do have a raw deal, like raw deal relative to that person, like they sit back and go, I really don't want these things.
Sure.
Or I thought this was going to be great, but now I've got this amount of time left, and it turns out it's not what I want.
Yes.
The Taoist statement has always been, humans are the creatures that are most capable of change. And we live in a universe of change. The idea that a thing has to be one way, even within the span of a human life, fundamentally defies the structure of the universe. We're intended to change. We're intended to become other things. We're intended to develop. When we don't do that, we're in defiance with actually kind of divine structure.
That's really the feature of Taoism that comes to mind when I think of it. That it's practical, it's reality based, it's truth based. What's a good way to step toward these arts of living?
Well, to do a side plug, just go to the website. I mean, I outline all the fundamental features of those.
Okay.
And whether or not a person, and there's a course that's there and actually leads a person step by step through the process of doing the basic work. The thing that will limit a person more than a lack of knowledge is actually just an unwillingness to face pain. And it's not that, so with that resource there, and there are other, I would say, common resources. Therapy for some people will make them aware of their own impulses and their underlying pain. And they may, for a person that only has like a tiny part of them that really is vocal and wants to do a thing, they may have to go through talk therapy in order to allow that to express and release themselves. If you're not in that position, then you can use tools like the ones that are on the website. And those are pretty much straightforward available. And the thing is that one of the fundamental arguments of Taoism is that if we jump over to the liberation pathway, enlightenment pathway, enlightenment is the natural state of a human being. What we have to do is remove obstacles to that process and encourage the person to get strong enough to walk the path if they want to. And many people that walk the path, again, they're not going to complete it. And that's not a failure. What happens is they're being driven by their desire to flee pain. And then when the pain leaves, their desire to pursue that pathway leaves.
But that's as far as they need to go, maybe.
That's the only place they really wanted to go. I mean, what's the function? For the Taoists, there is no great reward in heaven.
Right.
Yeah.
So
it's literally, if you get to a place of you're living the life that you want to live deeply and internally, it'd be fantastic if it's worked independent of society from the Taoist perspective. Because the society represents an illusion.
yeah.
But if it provides you with happiness and a measure of freedom from pain and longevity, which is another Taoist feature,
Right.
then you're doing the right thing.
So even if you want to, or if you have in your mind that you may eventually want to reach enlightenment, what we're calling enlightenment, then the way to start is to be happy and use these tools to do that.
Well, you want to pursue the balance of the four. And that does create an opportunity for happiness. Now, one counterpoint that I oftentimes get is that, well, if I make these changes, I won't be successful. And it's a matter of like, well, whose success are you talking about?
You mean in society?
In society.
Okay, wow.
And that's why I tell people very consistently, the art of living is for somebody that wants to be moderately successful, reasonably happy on a day-to-day basis. And if you're looking for ecstatic, Perhaps you will achieve that, perhaps you will not.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee of ecstatic. If you're looking for immensely wealthy, absolutely do not pursue the art of living. You won't be able to do it. And that's a strange thing, because immensely wealthy typically grows out of imbalance. And that's one of the reasons it's so self-destructive for an individual to achieve that. There's a reason we have the image of the bloated capitalist.
Right.
That's a pain-driven individual, not dedicating any element to them, being steadily eaten alive by their own success.
Well, I think moderate happiness is a worthy goal. And we can use the tools on the website that are proven throughout, over the ages. And if our viewers would like to contact you or to reach you, what's the best way to reach you?
Well, there is the AMA, which is the Ask Me Anything. So they can do that. You have to be a subscriber, but subscriptions are dirt cheap.
Okay, and that's on the website? That's
on the website. Like you would subscribe to the podcast, and then the AMA link is literally on every single episode now.
Okay, great.
Before we thought it was on every single episode. It was not. So it's there now.
Well, thanks for joining us for this talk with Master Mikel Steenrod and learning about Taoism. Thank you.
Thank you all.